Hi, thank you for joining me today. My name is Carrie Mallon. I am one of the co-creators, along with Annie Rugit, of the Spacious Tarot and our brand new expansion pack. In this video, I will be showing you some of the cards in the expansion pack and talking about the structure of that deck, but mostly what I want to do with you today is get a little more personal and talk about my journey as a deck creator, what it's like now that it's been, I can't believe this, but it's been 3 years, a little over 3 years since we launched the Kickstarter for our initial deck, the Spacious Tarot. So I now have all of that time under my belt of being a deck creator, now putting a second deck out into the world. So I just want to talk with you about what that's been like for me. Hi, it's future me. As I am editing this, I realized something super important I forgot to clarify here, which is in this video that you're watching, I'm talking about more of my behind the scenes process as a creator, but if you're interested more in each individual card, how we came up with the concepts for that card, what the actual process of creating the cards was, we do have an audio guide that's both Annie and I going through every card in the expansion pack, and that's available at thespacioustarot.com. If you get the expansion pack as a bundle with the tarot, you actually get the audio guide for free, or you can get the audio guide on its own for, I think it's $5. So I just wanted to clarify that. If you want more of a look at the process of creating the cards, the audio guide is for you. Other than that, back to what I was saying in this video. I'm so happy that the expansion pack is finally out in the world. It's available now at thespacioustarot.com. People are receiving their decks. We're getting tagged in Instagram posts. We're getting email with feedback on the decks. And there's really no other feeling in the world like seeing people form a personal connection with something that you had a part in creating. We'd already gone through that with the tarot deck, and I feel really lucky and really grateful that there were people out there who wanted to stick with us in this energetic realm, as we've come to think of it, and spend some time expanding that and going into these new cards. So that's the main emotion I want to put forward in this video, is how grateful I am and how much of an amazing journey it has been. But I also just want to, talk to you a little more about the ups and the downs and the whole process of what it's been like to be an indie tarot deck creator. Getting the expansion pack out took a lot longer than we anticipated, and there's a few reasons for that. The first is the simple fact that sometimes the creative process just takes how long it takes. When we announced the expansion pack, I ended up feeling like we announced it way too early, because Annie and I sort of both thought, we've already created a deck together. The expansion pack is 21 cards versus 78 of the tarot deck. So I think we got a little overly ambitious or overly optimistic with how quickly we could get the remaining cards out. This is something I think everyone learns if you're a creative person in any capacity, is you can't always really put a timeline on the creative process. We wanted these cards to feel right, just like we did with the tarot deck. We didn't want to try to rush through with any of the cards. So the simple process of creating the deck, I say simple process, the process of creating the deck ended up taking a little more time than maybe we initially thought it would. So that's one kind of lesson that I took forward from this project, is I wish we would have kind of kept it to ourselves for a little longer before I put the word out there like this is coming, because it ended up taking quite a while for it to actually come out once we'd started talking about it. The other thing that happened that some of you might already be aware of if you had been following us on our Instagram account, which is at The Spacious Tarot, or if you're on our mailing list, which you can join at thespacioustarot.com, is we did have a bit of a complicated printing situation as it pertained to the backs of the decks. So I have explained this in great depth on thespacioustarot.com, but just to give you a nutshell overview of this weird situation that we found ourselves in. Back when we initially created the Spacious Tarot and sent all of the files to our printer in 2019, we had created a version of the deck back that had a slightly lighter texture to the watercolor. And when we looked at the proofs, the electronic proofs from our printer at that time, Annie and I talked about it and we decided to change that a little bit, change the texture and make the backs darker. So the dark backs, as we've come to call them, are what ended up on the first edition of the Spacious Tarot, and not even just the first edition, but the first couple of print runs. So that's one of the things that's been confusing and hard to explain to people is a print run is really just when we're ordering a batch of decks from our printer. It doesn't have anything to do with which edition of the deck is. So anyways, at that time, we had changed the backs and the darker back decks were what went out for the first few print runs. When we went to do, I think like the third or fourth printing of the Spacious Tarot, a few things changed. Up until that point, I had been doing all of the shipping of the deck. And this is an awkward time to mention this, but side note, this is my first time filming a video on my phone because my tripod, I had technical issues. Who doesn't? YouTube stuff. And I don't know where to look. I'm like, where do I look? I don't know where. So if I'm looking weird, ignore it. So anyways, when we did the most recent print run of the tarot deck, again, a few things changed. So I had been doing all of the shipping up until that point, and this was about a year ago. It was in August of 2021. We decided to start working with a fulfillment center. So instead of me having all of the decks in my home and shipping them out myself, we now had someone helping us with shipping. So at first that was going really well, and we were very glad that we had decided to make that change. Since then, I'm not going to go too in depth on this, but just because this is the point of the video, is giving you more of a peek of what it's really like being a tarot deck creator, I'll just say we have had a handful of issues with our fulfillment center, and it's ended up causing some complications with things, and Annie and I have tried to do everything we can to just manage that on our side and not let that be something that impacts the people who are purchasing the deck. So again, I don't really want to go too into the weeds of that, but I'm just trying to be, honest that as a deck creator, if you're watching this because maybe you are considering becoming a deck creator or you already are one, you have to just be aware of things like that, that there's always, maybe not always, but there's usually kind of a good side and a bad side to any decision that you make, and you kind of just have to deal with that. Okay, but all of that was a super side tangent from the point I wanted to get back to with the backs of the cards. But it does relate, I promise. So we had started working with this fulfillment center, and because it made sense timing wise, we made that transition when we ordered a new batch of tarot decks, right? So that instead of them coming to me in my home, they could go to our fulfillment center. So everything was still going along great. People were ordering the tarot deck. We were working on the expansion pack. We finally get to the point where the creative process has flowed. The expansion cards are ready to go to print, and so we send those to our printer. Very long story short, we got the first test batch of expansion pack cards from our printer, and when I opened them and started looking at them, I noticed that the backs of the cards on the expansion pack were slightly different than the tarot cards that I had. So it took me a while to piece together how this had happened, but eventually I remembered, as I shared earlier, that we had created a lighter back with a different texture in the initial stages of the deck. And so somehow there was a mix-up on our printer's side, and they had taken that original file, which we had told them, don't use this file, and somehow a couple of years later that ended up on the expansion cards. So that was a big deal to us, because the whole kind of purpose of the expansion pack is for people to be able to use it with their tarot cards, and we wanted them to be able to blend together so that if you wanted to shuffle them all in together, the backs would be the same and you could use them as like one cohesive deck, right? It was a huge bummer because we had already announced a launch date, and we had to go back to people and say, hey, there's been a printing mix-up and now we can't launch the cards, we have to reprint them, and that was a whole thing, a huge thing behind the scenes. And again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds of this, but just trying to be honest to you with what it's like to be an indie deck creator. And this is an example of I should not let things get to me, but I saw at least like one person say that they didn't like the idea of the expansion pack because we were just doing it to make money. And I actually, the financials, because we had to reprint the decks and because of the issues we've been having with our warehouse, like I'm not going to go into the details, but I will just say, if you're looking for a quick way to get rich, creating an indie tarot deck is not it at all. Even now, like the whole reason I wanted to make this video is to talk more about the behind the scenes process. And even now, like I feel uncomfortable discussing it because I don't want it to kind of spoil other people's relationship with the deck. Like this is all stuff that we took on, and when you turn your passion into a business, you just have to accept and know that these kinds of things are going to happen. They're part of the package. And if you want all of the blessings and all of the amazing things that come from turning your passion into a business, then you have to deal with these kinds of things that are hard and crappy and kind of sucks. Things were already getting kind of tangled enough, and through a long process of detective work, Annie and I ended up discovering that we've come to call them like the light backs and the dark backs because it's the best way we can describe this sort of weird situation. As you can see, because I'm going to be showing you footage on the screen throughout this video, they're not super dissimilar. It's really just one is a little bit lighter and has a slightly different texture. But at that point, we only knew that that lighter back version had ended up on the expansion pack, but eventually, again, through some detective work, we found out it was also the lighter back version was on the latest printing batch of the tarot deck. The reason we did not know that, even though that we'd already been selling that print run of the tarot deck for like 6 months at that point, again, is because we had switched to using this distribution center. So instead of me handling the cards myself, the cards were with the distribution center, and I just assumed they looked exactly like the cards that I had from the previous print run when I had been shipping it out. Now, the good news in all of that is not a single person, since we'd been selling the tarot deck that had the different backs on it, had noticed or said anything to us. And I can totally see why, because if you had never had the Spacious Tarot before and you just got the deck with these backs, you would just think like, okay, this is the backs. You wouldn't have any reason to think anything of it. The only reason we ever noticed is when you look at them at the two different back versions side by side, then you start to think, okay, yeah, I see a bit of the difference here. So even trying to explain it now, it's like kind of a clusterfuck. I did, like I said, outline it on our website for anyone who wants to understand it more in depth. But really, when we ended up ultimately launching the deck, it ended up working out well eventually because we did the reprint with our printer. So now we had expansion packs with the lighter back and with the darker back. And the most complicated thing we've had to try to convey to people is that which expansion pack you purchase depends on when you purchased your tarot decks. Nothing else is different. The fronts of the cards are the same. Everything else is the same. It's just the backs of the cards. So we ultimately found a way to make it work, and we have expansion packs to offer to people no matter when they bought their tarot deck. But behind the scenes, it was extremely stressful and a lot of long conversations about like, how do we do this in a way that makes sense and that honors the specialness of this deck, because we love these cards so much and we really put our heart and soul into them, and we don't want this to be something that takes away from that. Now that we've gone through that and the decks are out and people are getting them, we feel pretty good about it. It's like it ended up kind of working out okay, but it was a strange and winding journey. I promise I did not want this whole video to be just complaining about things, and I'm really trying to balance that with like, this is amazing, this is so great, we're so happy about all of this, and we really are. But again, since I'm talking about what it's like as a tarot deck creator, This is like an opportunity to talk about things that normally Annie and I try to sort of just say, this is our stuff to deal with. But I also think it's important to be transparent, because some of these things that we've been going through, I wish that I would have like heard other deck creators talking about before I put something out there. So if this can be interesting or useful to anyone who's thinking about doing a tarot deck self-publishing, then that would be great. So, but I think this next thing is going to be the last kind of crappy thing I'm going to talk about before I'll move on and talk about some of the good things. So the other not so great thing I want to talk about is, for the past like year or two mostly, we, like many other tarot deck creators, both self-published creators like us, as well as this happens to mass market deck creators as well, is we've had to deal with a lot of plagiarism, a lot of fake decks, basically people stealing our artwork and selling cheap versions of the deck on things like wish.com and even like Etsy and eBay, things like that. It sucks for a lot of reasons. Like, one of the worst things about it is we have tried to put the word out and make people aware that when you're buying a tarot deck, you should always go directly from the deck creator or directly through the publishing house, so that you know you're getting the official project and you know you're supporting the people who actually created those cards. But some people don't see those messages and just truly don't know, and they just like Google the deck and they find like, you know, an Etsy listing or something, and they buy it, and then they find out that was a fraudulent deck. And then we get an email from someone being like, you know, there was this issue, or like, one of the biggest red flags to look for with counterfeit decks is, instead of including a paper guidebook, which our official deck comes with a guidebook, they will give you a QR code and say, scan this code to download the guidebook, and the codes often don't work. So we would get emails from people being like, hey, what's going on with this QR code? And we'd have to tell them, like, you didn't buy that from us. We didn't get any of that money. None of that support went to us, and you got fooled. Of course, most people don't want to buy a plagiarized deck, so a lot of times people just do not know that that's what they're getting. So spread the word, let all your tarot friends know, get decks directly from creators or from publishers or places that you know are legit, because even sites like Etsy, which I used to think Etsy was like a pretty cool platform, now I've realized there's tons of plagiarized things on Etsy, and we would like submit a claim to them, and a lot of times they wouldn't do anything about it, even though we could prove to them, like, we've been using this name for this long, here's our website, and so on. Because of all of this, another thing we'd been working on for a while, which we now finally officially have complete, because it takes some time, but we registered a trademark for the title of the deck with the US Patent and Trademark Office. So hopefully that will help us with some of these bigger sites like Etsy or eBay. When people are selling fraudulent decks, we can now tell these big sites, like, we own the trademark to this. Okay, I feel good actually getting some of these not so fabulous things out of my system and sharing them with you, because now I want to talk more about the fun stuff. I want to talk a little more about like what the expansion pack even is, because some of you have probably been watching this whole video and are like, what the hell is she even talking about? And I want to talk about what I've been doing with the expansion pack with my personal copy. Now that I have a personal copy, it's super, super fun and exciting. So the expansion pack is, I mentioned earlier, it's 21 cards, and it is designed to accompany the Spacious Tarot, but you could also use it on its own, more like an oracle deck. The concept for this is based on an older card system related to tarot called Minciati, and Minciati decks would typically have the standard 78 tarot cards, maybe with a few variations, and then they would have some extra cards. Typically the extra cards would be the 12 zodiac signs, the 4 elements, and then the older Minciati decks would also have cards for the classical virtues. For our version, we have the element cards and the zodiac signs. Instead of doing the classic virtues, we came up with our own concept that we call the value cards. So we created 5 cards, and we picked words that to Annie and I feel like themes that represent the vibe of the Spacious Tarot and more of like our kind of personal modern values. The expansion pack does come with its own little guidebook that I wrote, which gives some suggested meanings for each of the cards, and it also gives a few different ways, suggested ways for you to work with the cards to incorporate them into your tarot readings. Now that things have calmed down with the excitement and drama of actually launching the decks, I've really been enjoying having some space to work with these new cards myself. And I found that my personal favorite way to work with the expansion pack is doing like a mix and match approach with the tarot cards. So I haven't done a lot of like mixing them all in together, although I do plan to do that. I'm kind of easing into the way that I play with these cards. But right now, the main way that I've been using them is for my daily draws in the morning. My current practice is I first take the expansion pack and shuffle those, and I pull one card from the expansion pack, and then I get my pile of tarot cards and I shuffle them, and I will pick 2 tarot cards. The way I interpret these is I think of the expansion pack card almost as like an oracle card. So for example, especially when I draw the zodiac signs, I'm not always trying to be super literal about like, you know, what's going on in Taurus right now, astrologically, for example. If I pull the Taurus card, I might just look more at the imagery of that card or some of the more overarching themes that resonate to me about the concept of Taurus, and use that as inspiration to kind of anchor or tie into the message of the 2 tarot cards. This has been really nice for me. I'm getting some interesting messages. I've been sharing some snippets of this occasionally on my Instagram stories. Yes, I'm sort of back on Instagram. I don't know how long I'm back there, but that's a whole other story. And it's also just really fun for me to see the new cards then in combination with the tarot cards that I've gotten so accustomed to working with and looking at over the years. It's super cool to have this whole new dimension, and that word expansion, we titled it Expansion Pack, and I feel like that's exactly what it does, is it just expands the practice that I'd already worked with and kind of came into that groove with the tarot cards and takes that into some new space. I think I mentioned this earlier, but it's also such a cool feeling now that people are forming their own ways of using the decks, and people have been sharing those with us, that it reminds me of the bigger why behind why we created the tarot deck and now the expansion pack, so that when I have moments where things get difficult as a deck creator, or I'm dealing with like the stressful stuff that I mentioned earlier, those are the beacons that I turn to remember, hey, we've created these things that are really special, and I have my own connection to them. And something that's always been really important to me, even ever since we launched the tarot deck, is for the cards to be a space for you. That's what it says on the inside of the Spacious Tarot deck box. This space is for you. So it's really cool to know that it isn't just about me or Annie as deck creators and our experiences and our ups and downs. It's about the fact that we've been able to, again, be a part of creating something that other people can form their own relationship with. So that's really special, and it's something I'm extremely grateful for, is that we have created this space that is our space, Annie's space and my space as deck creators, but it also transcends that, and this space that you share with this deck will be completely unique. It's really your own space. Okay, I think I will leave it there for now. Just a little bit of an inside peek of what things have been like for me as a tarot deck creator. I'm sure it will continue to be an adventure from here. Who knows what the future will hold, but whatever it is, I'm ready for it. I think I'm ready for it. Let's do this. Let's go. Thank you for being here, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.